This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 185. Do you need a content librarian? Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast. This is the show where we help you grow your tribe and your bottom line through insanely good content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is July 28th, 2016. Hello, or as we say in Texas, howdy, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. Just a reminder, this podcast is available on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and now Google Play Music. So if you like what you hear, please feel free to click on over and subscribe so you can get every single episode delivered directly to your happy little ears. I also invite you to subscribe to our weekly tip emails. Yes, every Friday we send out a very quick content marketing tip, plus links to our weekly video and the weekly blog post, as well as to the podcast. So it's like a little Friday morning Happy Meal. To subscribe, just go to resonancetips.com. Okay, update on the book. Folks, every week, I'm sure this is going to be the week that I can send you to the URL so that you can pre-order your copies of the book. I'm going insane trying to get this all coordinated and all together. It is coming. Please stay tuned. Thank you for your patience. I will have a big announcement. I'll probably have a special episode of the podcast actually when it comes out and it's available because, it's so close. So close. Anyway, we are still putting the finishing touches on the landing page and a couple of other things. I will let you know about the book very, very shortly. So please stay tuned. Okay, all this month, we have been talking about the mid-year review, now that 2016 is halfway over. And last week, we talked about why you need a mid-year content review and how to do it right, how to do a content audit. If you happen to miss that episode, feel free to check it out on iTunes or our various other venues. Today, we are talking about a new job title that's getting quite a bit of buzz. That is the Content Librarian, and how to decide if your team might need one. But first, it's time to check in with our newsfeed for this week's rundown of news you can use. Facebook tops off our newsfeed this week. They have added a new feature that is available through the API. So if you're using the API for your Facebook Live videos, it now supports the ability to target those live videos to only stream to certain ages, genders, languages, or locations of viewers. So that makes helps you make the live streaming more accurate and more relevant. Now, it is currently limited to users who post live videos to Facebook through the platform's API. So it's not yet available for us Joe Schmo users on Facebook.com. So if you use Facebook's API, you might want to look into that for your Facebook Live videos. Okay, speaking of live video, Periscope has rolled out 3 new features, and it's so interesting. Over the last few months, Periscope has just been abuzz with activity after a long kind of dormant period. I think they're trying to play catch up with Facebook Live and trying to stay relevant. So Periscope has introduced 3 new features, and quoting here, to make it easier for you to discover and watch the broadcasts that you're interested in. The first feature is a highlights feature, and what that does is it automatically generates a short trailer for every Periscope broadcast. That could be fun. The second is the ability to embed Periscopes, and you can embed your Periscopes anywhere on the web by simply embedding the tweet that contained the link to the Periscope. Also very cool. And the third feature is that autoplay for live broadcasts is now available on the Android platform in addition to iOS. So some interesting developments out of Periscope. One more news item, Snapchat has added some new features as well this week. Must be the week for that. Maybe that summer is winding down and we're all gearing up for the fall. These new features are coming out. TechCrunch is reporting that Snapchat quietly introduced 2 new features this week. The first is called Suggest. and it offers users the option, quoting here from the article, the option to suggest that a friend follow someone on Snapchat. And if you know Snapchat, it's kind of, it doesn't work the way like Twitter does or Facebook. Like people can just find your page and follow you. It has to be, they have to have your ID or your little snap code. But now we have this suggest option, and it can be accessed by going to the stories list, then tapping and holding on someone's name. The recipient, again quoting from the article, the recipient will then receive a private chat message with the suggested account's details and information, as well as the ability to add that person right away. So if you are friends with someone on Snapchat, you can say, hey, I follow Jay Bear, or I follow this other person, think you might enjoy him. You can actually send them a chat message with a link to the person that you think they might want to follow. So good news for us looking to grow our audiences. The second feature is that Snapchat users now also have the ability to screenshot someone else's story and then share it to yours through the new Memories feature. So, it's almost kind of sort of like a retweet feature on Snapchat. And, it's interesting that, Snapchat has had its own way of doing things, and now it's kind of tweaking that to be more in line with other social networks. It'd be interesting to see what happens with Snapchat over the next few months. Okay, our content hit of the week is a post called Take Back Your Time with these 10 ready-made spreadsheet templates. This is on the Buffer blog. Buffer, one of my favorite tools, and they also produce some fantastic content. So who doesn't love a good time management tool, especially when it's free, right? And easy to use. So in this handy post, our friends at Buffer are generously offering ready-to-use Excel spreadsheets for things like social media reports. A blog post traffic tracker is also in there. Also a social media audit spreadsheet. Remember, we were talking about audits last week, so they have a spreadsheet for that, and much more. They actually have 10 really handy spreadsheets that you can access immediately and start using for your team. Terrific set of resources, and I will of course share the link in the blog post for this episode. Okay, that's it for this week's update. If you stumble across something you think might be of interest to your fellow content marketers, please tweet it to me at @ResonanceCont, that's Resonance Content with the ENT lopped off, so that we can share. Now it's time for this week's Spotlight segment. Do you need a content librarian? According to a recent survey by Accenture, 50% of marketers say they have more digital content than they can effectively manage, and 53% say they are spending more time on the operational details of managing content. So what has happened here is we are creating our own content shock. If you remember that famous post by Mark Schaefer where he talked about content shock, we're creating it within our own walls, let alone what's going out on the World Wide Web. But, think about it. Think about all the content that your company, that your team has created. We've got blog posts, we've got emails, infographics, presentations, photographs, social media images, videos, ebooks, webinars, white papers, podcasts. The list goes on and on. So first, let's address the obvious question. So what? Once this content is published, why do we need to even touch it again? It's published, it's out there, it's probably gotten a bump of traffic from being a new publication. Why do we need to take the time and effort to catalog it, to tag it, and to manage it? Well, 3 reasons, really. Number 1 is, remember, each piece of content is an asset. It could be each blog post, each presentation. It could be supporting your sales cycle. It could be offering an opportunity to link back to evergreen content via social media. So if you publish something, let's say on your blog that is that has long-term relevance, you could be linking back to that again later on. And also, there could be newsjacking opportunities that you're missing out on. So if a news item comes up about a certain issue that you covered sometime somewhere in your content, the question is, how quickly can you put your hands on it? And if you don't have a good catalog, a good archive in place, that could cost you some missed opportunities. So that's the first reason. The second reason is repurposing. And we've talked about that a lot on this podcast, how we don't necessarily need to be constantly reinventing the wheel. For example, if you want to put together an ebook about a certain topic, chances are you have ample content for that ebook existing in the content you've produced already. And when we have that content well curated and well managed, it's really easy to put our hands on it and to get it into place so that we can use it for those repurposing opportunities. And the third reason is that three-letter acronym that we all hate, ROI. Yes. Every time I hear ROI of content marketing, I want to cringe. But really, it is an important thing to do for your ROI. You want to let that content continue working for you after you've published it so that you can get more bang for your content, quote unquote, buck, meaning the time and effort that was put into creating it. And your CEO is going to love that. So yes, it is worth our time and effort to make sure all this content is cataloged, make sure it's tagged, and make sure that it is readily available at your fingertips when it is needed, either by your marketing team or by other teams within the organization. So we decided this is a good thing to do. The next question is, who is going to do it? And that's where everybody puts their finger on the nose and says, not it, right? No, we need a content librarian. Now, a couple of months ago, I wrote a blog post where I broached the topic because I had seen an article, I think it was on Business to Community, about how content librarian would be a hot new job in 2016. Now, that said, for most organizations, I don't believe that content librarian will be a full-time job. That is, unless you are like a HubSpot level content marketer where you're blogging several times a day and doing multiple webinars every month, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they just produce scads of content on a daily basis. But for most organizations, I think this will be an aspect of one of the jobs on your content team. I don't think it will be a full-time thing. But that said, it is time for us to start thinking about the job itself and figuring out how we're going to address those tasks within the teams that we have today for the 3 reasons I talked about a couple of minutes ago. So now what the temptation is to do and how it kind of winds up evolving is that we say, well, it's everybody's job. You know, making sure we're going to create this spreadsheet and we're going to say, hey, you put up a blog post, make sure to enter it in the catalog, or we publish a podcast, make sure it's entered in the catalog, make sure you tag it correctly, blah, blah, blah. And what happens is, if we say it's everybody's job, then it's really nobody's job. You know, there's no one person who is responsible for maintaining that archive. So again, if you tell each team member that they are responsible, well, what happens if you go to find something and realize that your archive is either a hot jumbled mess or there's nothing in there? You know, you put it in place 6 months ago and you got 2 blog posts logged in there. So if you produce content on a frequent, consistent basis, and if you've been doing so for a while so that you've got a big cache of content, then you really do need a designated content librarian. Again, not necessarily a full-time job, but one person on the team whose job it is to maintain that catalog, make sure that everything is tagged properly, and make sure that it is managed every single day. You also need someone to handle and I'm going to call it the customer service aspect of your archive. Let's say someone from your sales team calls in and says, hey, I have a prospect in such and such industry, and I'd love to send him some of the content we created about that industry. What do you got? It's really ideal customer service to be able to connect that salesperson with a single point of contact, a person who is deeply familiar with that archive, who works with it on a daily basis and can get her what she needs very, very quickly. So we know we need a content librarian. What do we look for when we look for who is going to do this job of content librarian? I would say I can identify 4 characteristics that I would look for if I were looking for someone to fill that job. Number one, I think you need someone who loves content, and not just the sexy creative part of content, but just loves content the way your librarians at your local library love books, and have a very almost parental love for that. Want to make sure that that's maintained, that it's cared for, that it doesn't just sit gathering dust. The second thing I would look for is someone who is super hyper organized, someone you can trust to create a system for cataloging all that content, and who's going to stick with it, who's not going to change their tagging practices every month and then use, is it blog, is it blogging, is it blogger, who's really going to create a consistent system and really stick to it. Number three, I think you need someone who is a finisher. So not someone who is going to just dive into that task, because remember, when they first start working on it, that system has got to be built, and that's going to be a huge task, pulling in all those pieces of content and getting them cataloged. And you need someone with the organizational stamina to be able to get all the way through to make that archive current to where you are now. And that's going to be a huge job. It's not necessarily going to be fun. Many aspects of it will be tedious, but you need someone who is going to see it through and who's going to be consistent in doing what they have to do to make sure that content is maintained day after day, week after week, month after month, and yes, year after year. The fourth thing I would look for is someone who has a customer service mindset, because as departments around your company, as they get a feel for what you're doing, they're going to realize that you have assets that could be serving them. So yes, that salesperson is going to be calling saying, hey, I want to send this prospect a blog post about XYZ topic, or maybe your CEO has been invited to speak at a conference about a certain topic, and she calls and says, okay, I need to, I'm doing a presentation on this. What do we have that I can use as background material? There are all different ways that content can serve people within your organization, and it's wonderful to have one person who is both deeply familiar with that archive and who has that customer service mindset, who is going to serve those internal customers very well. So once you have that person in place, the first thing to do is to get him or her to work building that catalog, building your archive, and setting up a system to make sure. Oh, hey, who do I have here? Hey, Hermione. Hey, I've got a beagle in the studio. And to set up a system to make sure that each piece of content, as it's created, is immediately cataloged, tagged, and readily available to anyone who needs it. It's not going to pile up for a week or a month and then they need to play catch up. So that is the scoop on the question, do you need a content librarian? I think you figured out the answer is probably yes. And some things to think about as you start to shape that position for your team. If you have any questions or want to add to the conversation, I would love to hear from you. And the best way to reach me is through the website, resonancecontent.com. Now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. As we talked about the content librarian job, we talked about how multiple individuals, multiple players across your company can access the assets that you have in your content warehouse, in your archive, and that as they get familiar with what you're doing, they're going to want that. But first they need to know about it, right? If they don't know those assets are there, if they don't know what's in that safe, then they can't be using it. So one thing we need to do is make sure we realize that content is an asset that can benefit not just marketing, but also sales, public relations, HR, investor relations, just to name a few. It can benefit people and customer service as well, but they can only use it if they know about it, right? So make sure that you are doing a good I would say a good PR job internally for your content marketing. Make sure people know what you're doing on the content side. Make sure they're familiar with what you've been doing up to now. And of course, once you have your content librarian in place, you can say, hey, if you want to know more, if you want to access something, call Michelle. She is our content librarian. She'll be happy to help you. And that way, your content is going to be working for you, not only in marketing, but all the way across your organization. Okay, campers, that's it for me today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. If you like what you've heard today, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or our various other venues or via our RSS feed. And if you really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review on iTunes. I would so appreciate it. Also, remember to sign up for your tip of the week at resonancetips.com. And I'll clarify that is different from the tip of the week in the podcast. It's totally separate, totally different, and uniquely valuable. And the address to sign up for those emails is resonancetips.com. As you know, I like to leave you with a quote every week, and today's comes from John D. Rockefeller. He once said, quote, "Don't be afraid to give up the good to go for the great," unquote. Again, this is Rachel Parker with Resonance Content Marketing. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you again next week. Take care.